Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Paul Hutchinson. I'm your host, and I'm delighted that you found us, and I hope that you find the next hour or so entertaining and informative about the world of soccer. What do we have for you this time? Well, the first few segments are all going to be about live soccer, which happened over the weekend in the Bundesliga. It was the Bundesliga was up and running again, which is great to see. And so we'll dive into all of the different games that were played over the weekend on Saturday and Sunday. After that, we're going to take a look at the world of soccer, the news that's happening around the world, the news that's happening around the world in the different leagues, and especially as it relates to the coronavirus and getting back up to speed with things. Okay, after that, we're going to take a look at the transfer market. Again, this time would be rife with rumours and agents trying to get players on the move. At the moment, we're not quite there yet, but we'll still see where players might end up. And then the final section of the show, continue my Around the World in 80 Soccer Moments. And this time we're going to focus on the 7-1 Germany win over Brazil in the 2014 World Cup. And also that goal that Marco van Basten scored in the Euro final of 1988. So I think that's plenty to be getting on with. We'd love for you to get involved. The best way to do that is via our social media outlets. We are at GSMC_soccer on Twitter and Instagram. And we'd love to receive your comments on anything that you've heard on the show this time round. Okay, well, let's get cracking then, eh? So for the first part of the show, we're going to concentrate on rounding up what happened in the Bundesliga. It is the only major league that is up and running after the hiatus due to the coronavirus. And it was lovely to have it back. Forgotten what it feels like to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning on your day off, but Saturday arrived. I'd set my alarm, and I totally ignored it. I couldn't remember why on earth I would have set my alarm for 6:30 in the morning. It was only when the snooze button went again, I think, oh, hang on, no, yeah, I did have somewhere to be. So I got up, put the coffee on, had the chats that I was following with other people who are also interested in seeing some live soccer for the first time in months. So it was really nice. Got myself a nice little Bloody Mary, and before the game, I was just hoping that it was going to go off safely. And some of the different precautions that were in place were pretty interesting. So teams arrived in several buses, not just one bus that would normally happen. Obviously to ensure the social distancing on the journey to the game. The players had been, previous to that, quarantining themselves in hotels. We'll come to what the Augsburg manager had done in the week leading up to all of this in a moment. But everyone wore face masks on their way to the ground. Everyone that was allowed into the ground had to have their temperatures checked. So if anyone was running a temperature, they would not be allowed into the stadium. Obviously, fans were not allowed into the into the venue itself, but there were several hundreds of people that needed to be there and were involved in making sure that they could put on a game. So apparently just over 200 people were allowed into the ground. So there was like around about 100 people around the pitch, like coaches, players, obviously, ball boys, and in just over 100 people actually in the stands themselves, like security, people involved in the media, medical professionals as well. And on top of all of that, there was another 100 people who were involved in like security, in charge of running VAR, and they were just allowed outside the stadium as well. So in the actual vicinity. And also one of the things that was insisted upon, that the footballs that the players were using a multi-ball system for many reasons, but also that they could be disinfected. So the ball boys were in charge of disinfecting the balls before and then again at half-time. I think I'm employing a multi-ball system as well because maybe the balls would end up in these empty stands. It would take a little bit of a while to get those retrieved, and so it was agreed upon that a multi-ball system would be in place. All right, well, let's dig into the actual games when they got going. The biggest of which probably was the Dortmund-Schalke game, the Ruhr Region Derby. Ended up being a pretty routine win for Borussia. They ended up 4-0 winners. They just looked much sharper, much fitter than Schalke, and a pretty routine situation for them. So Haaland was the player that opened up the scoring. Nice work down the right-hand side from Guerrero. Swung in a ball and just real deft touch. Borussia went up 1-0 with 29 minutes gone. And then Guerrero, just before half-time, was put through after the goalkeeper had made a bit of a hash of a clearance. And really, really clinical finish at the near post. Borussia Dortmund went in at half-time 2-0 up. And honestly, it could have been a lot more. Schalke really needed to score first in order for it to be an actual contest, but unfortunately after a fairly decent opening for Schalke, Hazard scored. It was a counter-attacking goal, some good interplay with Hazard striking low and hard with only 4 minutes gone in the second half. So that was it, done and dusted really. There was added scoring, Guerrero with an absolutely beautiful finish. Again, good work from Haaland in the build-up to all of that. But it was a very, very easy win for Borussia Dortmund. They didn't even need to play Sancho. McKinney, unfortunately, couldn't do very much about a Borussia Dortmund that looked much sharper than they did. Yeah, they enjoyed their 800th win in the Bundesliga era. So they put their marker down early on in the weekend. And putting pressure on Bayern Munich. Another game that kicked off at the same time as the Borussia Dortmund game was another top-of-the-table team, RB Leipzig. They were playing Freiburg at home, and although Leipzig were creating lots of chances and really peppering the goal, it was actually Freiburg that took the lead in this one from defender Gilder. A corner came in, there was a lot of deflections, and it came off the back heel of Gilder, who I don't think knew too much about it, honestly. But from their set-piece opportunity, Leipzig were able to go 1-0 up, and that was the score at half-time. Again, there was lots of frustration, I think, on the Leipzig side, where they were having lots of possession, lots of chances at goal, and there was a particularly gilt-edged chance from Lookman, the Englishman who used to play for Everton, threw in on goal, should have scored. A lovely ball in from Campbell, but on the 77th minute, it was another chance created by Campbell that put Poulsen in. He leapt like a salmon, hung in the air, and directed a header past the goalkeeper. to save Leipzig's blushes. They, and so, like, one apiece wasn't a great result for Leipzig, honestly, so they were going for it a little bit, but it was actually Freiburg who had a goal chalked off due to VAR. They had another set piece. A header was won at the back post, but it was that person who was offside, and Robin Koch, who did get the eventual goal, convert the actual chance, ruled out for offside. So a disappointing restart to the season for Leipzig, who really needed to win that in order to maintain the pressure on Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund. Okay, we'll take a little quick break there, and when we come back, we'll focus more on the games that took place on Saturday. You are listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco, ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. In the first part of the podcast, we looked at the first couple of games that were available to watch in the US from the Bundesliga. We're going to continue to break down some of those games as well. We're going to start next with Augsburg versus Wolfsburg. And this was a really interesting game. Lots of incidents in this. The first goal was scored just before half-time by Stefan, and what a great header. One of the best headers I think I've ever seen to score. Just incredible. A ball was hit from the left-hand side, and just maybe 2 or 3 yards in from the 18-yard line, connects with his head and flies into the top bin. Absolutely brilliant goal to give Wolfsburg the lead. So that was the score at half-time, 1-0. When they came back, Augsburg got an equaliser. A really great ball whipped in from a free kick. But unfortunately, it was John Brooks, who really didn't have that great a game, unfortunately, for Wolfsburg. He connected with the free kick, put it on his own frame. The goalkeeper spilled it, wasn't expecting it to come off his own man, I suppose, and then it was bundled in by Jedav in the 54th minute. So it was one apiece at that point, and then it looked like that Augsburg had done the same thing again, a very similar situation where a free kick was put into the box, and it actually went in, but it was ruled offside because one of the players who didn't actually touch the ball, but was very much in the way of the goalkeeper's line of sight. It was then ruled offside because he was interfering with play, and so unfortunately that goal had been chalked off. And so it was very last minute, into injury time, when Wolfsburg got the winner. Another lovely whipped-in cross from the right-hand side, and Ginczek got on the end of it, couldn't really miss, just needed to let it hit him, and they got a winner. Whether it was deserved or not, I don't know. There was a lot of incident in this game, but it was, and a lot of fun. The late game at 9:30 in the morning was between Eintracht Frankfurt and Borussia Mönchengladbach. This was over as a contest after about 7 minutes. The first goal Borussia Mönchengladbach scored was less than 40 seconds into the game. Plea, he took it very nicely indeed. Pretty soft defending in all honesty. And so, it was definitely a bit of a theme that the teams in the higher end of the table seemed a lot more prepared and organised and up for it than the teams below. And they just were punished again for fairly lax defending. Thuram, who is the son of Lilian Thuram, World Cup winning French national team fame, his son put them 2-0 up with 7 minutes gone. And really after that it sort of dissipated into a talk amongst yourselves sort of situation. Borussia were awarded another they were awarded a penalty that was converted, a pretty soft penalty in all honesty really. The defender barged into him a little bit. He felt the contact, went down, got himself a pen. Nothing more than Borussia Dortmund deserved at that point, leading by 3 goals. There was a little bit of a glimmer of hope when Silva was put through, finished tidily after 81 minutes. It looked like we might get a bit of a barnstorming finish, but not really. There was, however, after that final goal, one of the great goal line clearances I think I've ever seen. If you get a chance to have a look at what happens when they're 3-1 up, the goalkeeper rushes out to try and prevent a shot from happening. He gets passed around, and it's up to a central defender to throw himself at the ball before the attacker should have absolutely tucked it home, but didn't. If you get a chance to have a look at that, I would highly recommend it. It's probably the best part of what was actually a fairly ordinary game. And Eintracht Frankfurt really, they're just above relegation. They didn't really look all that great, in my opinion. They're 5 points above the relegation zone right now. A very handy 3 points for Borussia Mönchengladbach. Just briefly round up the last couple of games as well that got played on Saturday. Hoffenheim were at home to Hertha Berlin, and after a goalless first half, fairly unfortunate really from Apaguma, who put through his own goal, shot from outside of the box, probably wasn't going anywhere near the goal, just instinctively stuck out a boot, and it went in. Then we had Ibisevic, who scored a cracking header from, again, the standard of crossing was really good this weekend. One that basically he couldn't really miss. Whipped in from the left-hand side, got his head on it, powerful header, down, into the ground, and the goalkeeper absolutely no chance really of saving that. And then the best goal, and probably maybe even the best goal of the weekend, Cunha, who was one-on-one with the full-back, had his back to goal, little bit of trickery, a bit of a Cruyff turn, a little bit of injection of pace, racing in on goal, and was able to smash it home. Probably the best goal of the weekend, so well worth having a look at that. Therefore, Hertha Berlin ran out 3-0 winners over Hoffenheim. The final game on Saturday that we're going to cover here is between Fortuna Düsseldorf and Paderborn. Paderborn, by the way, I've got a little bit of a soft spot for Paderborn because they are twinned with Bolton. So, but both of these teams right now are struggling. Both are in the relegation zone as we speak, and were, as they came into this game, that reflected the sort of game it ended up being. Pretty cagey, a couple of chances that hit the woodwork, but it ended up being 0-0. A point really no use to either one of those teams. And by the way, Dusseldorf, I've got a bit of a thing for Dusseldorf too, because that's a fun town, a fun night out around Dusseldorf. Highly recommend that too. But in terms of this game, not a great deal to report home about. Unfortunately, that ended up 0-0, and they remain in the bottom three after the weekend. All right. When we come back, we will complete the roundup of the games that were played this weekend. There was 2 games played on Sunday, and we'll take a look at those ones when we come back. You're listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back In the last few sessions of this podcast, we've been having a look back at some actual live football, which has been so nice to be able to say. And we rounded up all of the games that happened on Saturday. What I'd like to do now is just take a look at the two games that were played on Sunday. It was an early start for those of you watching live. This was a game between Cologne and Mainz. This was probably the most highly contested game of the weekend. Cologne got off to a decent start. They were actually awarded a penalty. Absolute stonewall penalty. The defender bundles him over in fairly clumsy fashion. 100% a penalty, and it was slotted home right into the side netting by Huth. And they got off to a great start. So Cologne 1-0 up. It remained that score at half-time, and with about 53 minutes gone, Kainz was able to double the advantage for Cologne with a really good header, a very nicely whipped-in free kick into the box. Cologne looking good for their 2-0 lead. It was at that point that changes were made. Mainz got themselves back into it. A really lovely goal, a really lovely team goal. I think this is probably the best team goal of the weekend. Lots of really good movement, and Ayawangi, he just engineered a little bit of a finish. He made a run to the near post and flicked it in with great aplomb. After again another very nicely whipped in ball, lots of cute little interplay before the cross came in as well. They were back in it, because after the hour, the score was at 2-1 to Cologne. And then a few minutes later, Koundé got hold of the ball just midway into the opposition half and just saw an opportunity, saw a space to be able to run into. Nobody around him on the opposition side reacted, and he was allowed to run straight through the middle of their defence with the ball and was able to place it to the left of the goalkeeper and into the net. So having sat pretty on a 2-goal lead, they then contrived to get it back to 2 apiece. Probably a fair result in the end. A fun game. A bit of toing and froing in that from a weekend where drama was pretty much at a premium. It was good that there was a good close game that for the neutral you could enjoy in that way. A really fun game. And the final game of the weekend was played at 9 a.m. Pacific time, and it was between Union Berlin and Bayern Munich. And Bayern Munich came out pretty comfortable winners at the end of this one. At the start of the game, it was pretty tight, pretty even for both teams. If Berlin had crossed the ball at the right times, and whether those crosses had come to the right receivers, they may have made some chances. You always felt that Bayern Munich had a few more gears to go through. Partway through the first half, Muller had a headed goal ruled offside after a VAR check. It wasn't actually him who was offside. It was, I think, Gnabry who was at the end of a free kick and headed back towards goal. And honestly, it was so close. It was one of those where they have to project dotted lines onto the field in order to make a decision. So it was super close. Pretty unsatisfying, honestly. It was left to one of the Union Berlin defenders to gift Lewandowski a penalty in the 40th minute, and that's when they opened the scoring, dispatched pretty confidently into the bottom corner, and at half-time they were 1-0 up and on cruise control, really. I always felt that they had like an extra little gear if needs be to quash the challenge of Union Berlin. It wasn't till late on again in the second half did Bayern Munich make it a 2-0 lead, with Pavard scoring from a corner, a headed goal again, but this time everyone up challenging. It was a really old-fashioned goal, actually, and I'm sure that Union Berlin, who pride themselves on scoring goals through set pieces, actually allowed one themselves. Munich had been peppering the goal, and really should have scored more than the one to the point of when Pavard scored. But, job done. They will see that as they're an absolute machine right now. Lewandowski becomes the first person in Bundesliga history to have 26 goals from 26 matches, and that they just keep on keeping on. They are on fire right now. Since Hansi Flick has been in charge of them, that's just 16 games, by the way, they've scored 50 goals, and that is the best record of any coach in the league's history. So this is some going. It does feel there's almost a sort of inevitability of them winning the championship this time round, especially with teams around them who are floundering a little bit, especially Leipzig, who will rue the 2 points that they dropped this weekend. So where does that leave us? Well, Bayern Munich remain on top. They have 58 points and are 4 points ahead of Borussia Dortmund, who are on 54 points. Borussia Mönchengladbach took advantage of Leipzig's dropped points, and they are now in third position on 52 points, with Leipzig on 51. Bayer Leverkusen, their game is tomorrow. That you can see on Fox Sports at 11:30 tomorrow against Werder Bremen. They're on 47 points, so they could put themselves within a point of Leipzig in that all-important fourth Champions League position. In terms of the relegation zone, Paderborn and Dusseldorf, they played out a particularly average 0-0 draw, so no real progress made there. Werder Bremen, as you've heard, they play on Monday, and they have a real opportunity now really to gain on those teams that are just outside that relegation zone. Mainz are currently in 15th place out of 18. They're on 27 points, with Fortuna Dusseldorf on 23 points, 4 away from safety. So yes, if Werder Bremen do win tomorrow, then they'll be 6 points away from safety, but they do have a game in hand on everybody else. So what did we learn? It was unusual. All of the substitutes were like hanging out in the stands, socially distancing from each other. There were elbow bumps rather than hugs. There were even shaking hands, touching boots and things like that. One of my favourite parts was when Borussia Dortmund won. Usually what they would do is salute the yellow wall, the huge stand that they have in Dortmund. And they did that where everyone was spread out. They weren't able to hold hands, but they did go to the empty stadium to celebrate the win, which if I was a Borussia Dortmund fan, I would have loved to have seen that. That just makes you think that they are still thinking of you even when they are playing to an empty stadium. I felt that it felt like players were reluctant to get tight. Now, whether that was because they hadn't done that in training and were getting used to it, or whether in the back of their mind they don't want to get too close because of what's going on, did seem very training ground paced at a lot of the games that happened. So that might improve. It must be very difficult to go from 0 to 60, without having played even a warm-up game. It's all been individually training. So it must be extraordinarily difficult to get going again in games that really do matter. And it was notable that I thought that the top teams were ready for it. It was weird. All interviews after the game were all sort of video conference calls. And it's just, these are the way things are going to be. So I'm sure that the Premier League did look at what happened this weekend with interest, especially when it came to fans staying away. I know that that's been a major concern for the Premier League, and it appears that fans did stay away from the grounds, which is encouraging, and I hope something that will be recognised throughout Europe when it comes to restarting up around Europe. Hopefully, I don't know as yet whether everything's gone well in terms of, no one contracting the virus or anything like that. My fingers are firmly crossed here that has been the case, that everyone's safe and well, again, I'd like to thank the players for, putting on a show. It was really refreshing to see some live sport, and I thank them for it. All right, and in the next section, what we'll do is have a look at some of the news around and about all the different leagues that we're concerned with. And you're listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back. In the previous parts of the podcast, we've looked back at the round of games that happened in the Bundesliga over Saturday and Sunday, and it was a lovely experience to be able to do that. What I want to do in this section of the podcast is to look around the world and see what's happening with all the various different startups of the different league situations, and see what the prospect is for other leagues to start up their games like what Germany did. So, I'm going to start off with the governing body of the European game, UEFA, and their president, Alexander Serafin, has been interviewed. And it looks like they've come up with a little bit of a plan about finishing the European competitions in August. So, that'll be interesting. There are a few round of 16 games yet to be completed, and then obviously the quarterfinals and semi-finals after that. And it's looking more and more likely that they want to play 2 legs in the quarterfinals and semi-finals, which I think was an idea was bandied around that they might just have neutral grounds playing just one leg, so that it's just a one-game play-in. That doesn't appear to be the case any longer. They are looking, after all of the domestic leagues have been completed in Europe, that then the focus will then be shifted onto the European games the month of August. Particularly interesting, I mean, obviously there'll have to be a shortened space of time for them to complete all of those things. Serafin was at pains to say that they won't be in front of any spectators. And the thing that I found fairly interesting was the idea that had your league, say for example in France and in Belgium, league had been called and not completed in full, that you would have to play qualifiers for the European competitions next year. He said that only sporting reasons can be the formula for qualifying for Champions League and Europa League. So, for example, PSG won the French league by default, essentially. But it looks like if you came lower down the league, that you wouldn't automatically get the European places and would need to then play off. Whatever that looks like, I can't even imagine what that actually means, really. So, a lot of questions. I would really like almost like a World Cup style tournament of clubs. I think that would have been a lot of fun, and it would have, obviously you're not going to have the same amount of revenue and time on the TV if you do that. So I think that's the concern there. All of these television companies have contracts with UEFA to ensure a certain amount of games, and at the moment that's what they're going to try and fulfill. But we'll have to keep an eye on that. It's looking more and more likely that it's August that those competitions will be completed. In the Premier League, not a great deal to report in terms of the starting up of the league. I believe that the owners of the clubs will meet on Monday to discuss further a way of getting the league off the ground. I'll probably be able to report on that on Thursday. A strange one, really. Lacazette was reported in the papers on Sunday that he'd been seen inhaling nitrous oxide from a balloon. Arsenal are taking these reports very seriously, and they're going to handle it internally. It seems like a couple of years ago, that seemed to be a bit of a fad, that footballers were at social gatherings indulging in some nitrous oxide or, laughing gas. And this has not been a great lockdown for our mate Lacazette, because he's one of 4 players from the Arsenal squad who broke social distancing guidelines a couple of weeks ago. And just a strange story that I thought might be of interest. In La Liga, clubs are looking for starting to come together for group training as of this Monday. And they're looking to step up a return to league play in June. Players have had coronavirus tests when they've been doing their individual training. There have been some players that have tested positive, 5 in fact, but that's over the top 2 divisions. So that's pretty optimistic. Training can't be anything more than 10 players as of Monday, and then they are looking at a 12th of June start. So that's good. Seems optimistic, barring any kind of reports after the Germany's reopening. Hopefully there'll be good news on that regard, and I'm sure that other leagues will take a certain amount of heart if they have been successfully carried out. In MLS, I talked in the last podcast about the potential for like a mini tournament that won't replace league play, is in the place of, if that makes any sense. That tournament they are proposing will be just almost like a focus for people to enjoy the sport rather than it be included in actual league play. So, for example, we talked about it being in Orlando. The league wants the matches to be competitive, but because they're unsure about what the situation is, they are unclear as to whether the games are going to count towards the regular season standings, or indeed whether those games will go to help teams qualify for the CONCACAF Champions League. We also mentioned last week that the US Open Cup is unlikely to be completed this time, so maybe this would be a way of awarding teams that won't be involved in that competition anymore this time round. So the plan is that the league is proposing a summer tournament, essentially, which is going to involve all 26 teams. They've still not finalised all of this yet, but they hope to begin training June 1st, so that's Monday, June 1st. I'd be into that. I think some sort of competition. It sounds like a lot of fun for players as well. And from what I'm reading there, also going a little bit stir-crazy in the US, especially those that are, again, away from their families and what have you. So this might be a nice release to be able to play some games, and hopefully consequential games as well. And it'd be nice to see MLS back. In other sort of football news, the Belgian champs have been declared as Club Brugge. They had suspended their league and had cancelled the league, but I think they've come out now to declare Club Brugge, who had a 15-point lead over Ghent with 1 game to go, and have just confirmed that they have been crowned champions. They've also confirmed that the teams that were in the relegation zones would also be relegated. They hope that they have also declared who their Champions League and Europa League representatives will be, having just learned what UEFA think of that. Maybe they might have to rethink those things, but Charleroi, Royal Antwerp and Standard Liège are in the Europa League next year, and Ghent and Club Brugge will be in the Champions League. And one final thing as well I want to cover is that the 4th tier of professional soccer in England has concluded their season, that they are not going to complete the rest of the games, which was unanimously voted upon to not continue with the season. I'm not quite sure, it's not been detailed as yet as to what that means regarding promotion and relegation. Certainly if you are in the bottom 2 clubs, that makes a huge difference in that division, because you then go down into the non-pro leagues or the semi-pro leagues. So no decision as yet I'm aware of that's been made on that yet. The 3rd tier, which is League 1 in the EFL in England, they couldn't decide as to what happens next. I think the teams Peterborough United, Oxford United, Sunderland, Fleetwood, Portsmouth and Ipswich Town all released a joint statement saying that they have no desire to void the season And they go on to say about they don't want any points per game scenarios or letting a computer decide what they call their footballing fate. So it's all very dramatic, but I think they, again, meet on Monday to see if they can come to some arrangement at my football club, Bolton Wanderers. They're rock bottom of this league, in League One, with not a great deal of hope of surviving, quite honestly. But it'd be interesting to see whether the league isn't voided, but also I don't know how they're going to play these games. Just seems maybe they're taking themselves a little bit too seriously here. I don't know. But we'll find out hopefully more after that meeting on Monday. All right. If you would like to raise any thoughts on what you've heard in the news section there, especially the idea of the European competitions up and running again, let us know. At GSMC_soccer on Twitter and Instagram. All right. In the next section, we are going to have a look at some of the transfer rumours that might be involving your clubs. You are listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. In the last part, we looked at some of the news coming out around the world regarding coronavirus and various other things. In this section, I'd like to talk about some of the transfer rumours that are going around right now. It would be absolutely the point of the year where all the different names would be being bandied about by clubs and agents. And unfortunately, because of the circumstances that we're in, we don't have very much clarity on what's happening still. Players who are not happy at their clubs or want a different move for whatever reason, they'll still be looking to do that probably in the next few months or so. So let's have a see what's happening let's have a look at some of the rumours that are going around right now in terms of players moving to various clubs. David Silva, whose contract is running out at Manchester City, that's meant to run out on June the 30th. Should they need to have more time in order to complete the season, he seems he is very happy to do that. So he's a bit of a club legend, though, David Silva, so I can't have imagined him doing anything other than that, because he's so well regarded, and to just kind of leave them halfway through a season, I don't think would have gone down very well. But also, he seems like a nice chap, and he wants to do the best for a club that he's established as one of the great clubs in the world right now. There's also, Manchester United have been looking at the Welsh winger that's playing at Schalke right now, Rabbi Matando, and he's only 19. Should their bid to go and get Jadon Sancho from Borussia Dortmund fall through, then they feel like he would be a decent replacement or a decent option. In other news in Europe as well, so Lionel Messi, he has hinted that his fellow Argentine international Martinez, who plays at Inter Milan, would be a really good option for Barcelona. He sees him as a future star for Barcelona. You've got to think that Messi has a pretty decent bit of influence at Barcelona. So, yeah, let's see what happens with that. Carlo Ancelotti, who has turned things around at Everton since he arrived partway through this season. They were really struggling, and he's really got hold of them and are on the brink of pushing into those European places should the season start up again. And he's already looking to next season to maybe strengthen their midfield, and looking in particular at PSG's Rabiot. Yeah, he's 25 years old, a World Cup winner. I think Everton are among possibly Newcastle and Leicester as well. Those are those teams that are looking to kick on a little bit, especially Newcastle, with the potential for their new ownership to come in and really sort things out. In fact, Newcastle are looking to buy Wilfried Zaha from Crystal Palace. He's 27. I think he's outgrown Crystal Palace again, if that's possible. He did go to Manchester United as a young kid. It never really happened for him there. But I think if Newcastle, with their new owners throwing the money around, it would be the last sort of big transfer fee for him. I think that would be a pretty decent move for him, really. He would still be the big player rather than going to somewhere like United or Manchester City or Tottenham, wherever, where there's lots of big names already established, that he could go there and take that club on to bigger and better things. So I think that's a potentially interesting move. Bayern Munich, they're still trying to get hold of Leroy Sané. He's out of contract at Manchester City. He's actually at the end of this season, rather. It's looking less and less likely that Sané is going to be kept on at Manchester City. I don't know what happened there, but the relationship has soured there. He looks like a good player. Still only a young kid too, and obviously a German international. Playing for Bayern Munich, I'm sure he would relish that opportunity. £50 million they are looking at in order to sign him. Chelsea are looking to offload Bakayoko for £31 million, but PSG are looking to spend a little bit less than that, it says. Bayer Leverkusen, they think they're not going to be able to hold on to Havertz. He's only 20, midfielder. Chelsea, Liverpool and Manchester United are interested in signing that player. I think they want to try and persuade him to stay, but are kind of not hopeful of that happening. This is a story that I think we'll hear more and more of, or this type of story, with France striker Kylian Mbappe. He might, given ordinary circumstances, he might have pushed to leave Paris Saint-Germain at the end of this year, but I think with all of the financial upheaval that will no doubt happen after the coronavirus has happened, he's going to stay for one more season with PSG. He's still only 21 years old. I know that I think probably either Barcelona or Real Madrid are going to be in for him at some point, but I think he's said, okay, yeah, let's wait for all of this to die down and then make a decision after that. So it seems like a sensible way of going about things. And honestly, I can see maybe Paul Pogba doing a similar kind of thing. Although it is reported that maybe Juventus are close to re-signing him, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't just say, you know what, let's see what happens here. I'm on a good contract, a little bit more certain about what's happening. I'll make a decision then. But also, Real Madrid are reportedly very interested in signing for them, especially if you've got French legend Zinedine Zidane as manager there. So that might be something that would persuade him to go there too. What else do we have? Mentioned a few times now that Dries Mertens, he's coming to the end of his contract at Napoli. And so he's attracting interest from all over Europe. Inter Milan, they think they're close to signing him this time around, but Chelsea have also been interested, I think, as well. He would be a little bit of experience up front for Chelsea. That would be an interesting one for me, I think. Wherever he goes, he's a good striker, very, very well thought of everywhere. We've reported a few times that Sadio Mane and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang at Liverpool and Arsenal, respectively, they might be looking for new challenges, shall we say. One of those places that they could go might be Barcelona. But Xavi, legend at Barcelona in the midfield, he has said that neither one of those players he sees as fitting into the system at the new camp. So put a bit of a dampener on that, but I do think that Aubameyang might be looking to get out of Arsenal, especially if they don't get good European football this time round. All right, I think that might just about do it for wrapping up of all of the different sort of transfer news. If you've heard anything, or if you want to pitch in with who you think your club need to get in the transfer market, love to hear from you. We are at GSMC_podcast, and let us know who you think your club should be going for In the final part of the podcast, I'm going to continue with what I'm calling Around the World in 80 Soccer Moments. It's just a look at some of the more significant moments in the sport that we love. You're listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. In the last section of the podcast, we looked at the transfer rumours, the different places where players could potentially end up going after all this has settled down. In the final section of the podcast, we're going to continue what I'm calling the Around the World in 80 Soccer Moments. And in previous ones we've had World Cup moments, the Hand of God, when the USA played in the 1950 tournament and beat England, when they fielded just a whole bunch of amateurs and things. So, some significant moments. And the first one that I want to bring your attention to is when Brazil were defeated 7-1 in the semi-final of the World Cup in 2014. This was just unbelievable. Brazil had done pretty well up to the point. Getting to the semi-final, they were the hosts, of course, so the expectation was absolutely through the roof with the home fans. Almost delirious with anticipation for this semi-final. But the thing about it was that, unfortunately, their two best players were out for this game. Their centre-half, Thiago Silva, and also Neymar. Neymar had been the one that had sort of dug them out of so many holes getting to the semi-final that people went into that game, or fans of Brazil went into that game thinking, we just need to get through this game, get Neymar back, and be ready for the final. Anyway, they unfortunately came up against Germany. Now, I remember watching this game and just not being able to believe my eyes at what happened. Because after 30 minutes, Brazil were 5-0 down. 5-0 down. It's ridiculous. And the thing was, you could just see the confidence zapping out of everyone in the Brazilian defence. I just remember David Luiz's hair just kind of furiously sort of flying around, not really knowing what to do. Because each goal that Germany scored, 3 or 4 people could have scored that goal. They were literally queuing up to score these really simple tap-ins. It was just an absolute decimation of a team. They just were relentless. And it was 5-0 after 30 minutes. Could well have been 7 or 8 because there were some really good chances missed as well. It was one of those games that once that had happened, once they were 5-0 down, there was no coming back. It was a dead rubber, and in the second half, they added 2 more goals, and there was a consolation goal for Brazil at the very end. Now, remember the goalkeeper absolutely doing his fruit that he couldn't believe that a goal had been let in by him, because that was his goal. That was his contribution to this absolute pummeling. And I remember being really distraught about it all. It was their biggest humiliation. And to do it on home soil, to do it in front of, to have that happen to them in front of their home fans, I can't believe it was just ridiculous. My experience of watching that was at my favourite place that I always watch my games. The place was absolutely packed to the rafters, and just everyone was like shaking their heads, looking at each other in absolute disbelief that this was actually happening. It was astonishing. I've never seen such a discrepancy in play at such a high level. And it took Brazil a long while to come to terms with such a crushing defeat. Okay, going to move on to the next soccer moment. It's the Van Basten goal in the 1988 European Championship final, as it was then. It started being called the Euros, I think, in 92. But this was the European Nations Championship, and it featured the Netherlands and the Soviet Union. I think this is the last time that they played under that banner. And the Netherlands had a great team in like the 70s. They reached the finals of the 1974 and 1978 World Cup finals with Johan Cruyff, and so were considered the best team never to win a World Cup. And at the helm, their manager was Rinus Michels, who had organised this Dutch team to play what was called, or what was dubbed, total football. The idea being that every player on the field knew everyone's job, because in training sessions, they wouldn't just stick to their positions as a striker or as a centre forward or even as a goalkeeper. They would also have sessions where they played at left back or at sweeper, so that everyone knew and everyone had the idea of the responsibility that went with all of those different positions. And he had led them to that 1978 final, and unfortunately hadn't won it. But in 1988, the Netherlands had one of the great teams. In that team was Ruud Gullit, Frank Rijkaard, and Marco van Basten. And Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten were also part of a great AC Milan team. So I remember going into that tournament that England were involved in, thinking that they were the team to beat, and really feared, because they were just so much better than everybody else, it seemed, that year. England had played them in the group stages of the competition, got absolutely battered, not even close to competing with them at all. And they went on their merry way, reached the final. It was a pretty close game, in actual fact, against the Soviet Union, who themselves were a legitimate team. The Netherlands took the lead, but it's the second goal that is the one that's probably most remembered, and the one that actually secured the trophy for them. There's a ball that comes in off the left-hand side, and it's a kind of looping cross. It doesn't look like too much danger should come from this. But because Marco van Basten was at the absolute peak of his powers, he just lamps this thing with his right foot, a volley from a very acute angle at the right of the posts, and just leathers it. And it goes in. The keeper has absolutely no chance. If you've never seen this goal, you absolutely do need to look that up. Marco van Basten's goal against the Soviet Union in the European Championship final in 1988. Just incredible. Remains absolutely one of the just best strikes of a football ever. And it was the culmination of Michels' work with the Dutch side. It was important that a team that good were also crowned champions of something. And they did that in the 1988 European Champions. I just remember as a kid not believing kind of what I saw. It was just an incredible striking. And one of those that you try and go away with your brother in the backyard trying to replicate. Just fantastic stuff. Okay, well I think I might call it a day there. I think we've covered plenty of ground. Thank you again for spending this time with the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Really means a lot. I'll be back on Thursday with, hopefully, if they decide to go through with the next round of games in the Bundesliga, another preview of what's to come for there, and a roundup of all the different news that's happening in the world of football. If you can, give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram on @GSMC_soccer. Really appreciate it. And if you can, review podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. Really appreciate it. It allows other people to be able to access it and know about us. And yeah, I'll be delighted to hear from you. Anything that you've been struck with during this podcast, any comments, gratefully received. And I hope to be with you again on Thursday. Until then, thanks again, and stay safe.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.